In this video, I am demonstrating the multimedia principles that I've used during the instruction. In this slide, I am trying to activate the learner's prior knowledge by telling them what they have learned already and then focusing on the main content that is of importance today. Doing that, I am fading out the rest that is not important. Therefore, in this slide, I am focusing on the focus on learning domain, fading, and signaling principle. In this slide, I am giving them an overview about the lesson by dividing them into three separate sections rather than teaching them in one continuous unit. So this is the characteristic of the segmenting and also the pre-training principle. In this slide, I am using pre-training and signaling by using red fonts. But in addition to that, I'm also using personalization principle. I'm asking them in a conversational style to recollect some of the contents from their previous chapters. Here I have used only graphics and narrations and excluded all the narrative text. Therefore, I'm using redundancy and modality principle. But also I am used phase diagrams. This is because I wanted the learner to mentally animate the structure of the nucleic acid. Therefore, I have also used a metacognitive strategy. In this slide, I'm focusing on the split attention principle. You can see that the text has been integrated into the diagram. Therefore, I'm using the spatial contiguity principle. Also, the narration and the text has been presented simultaneously, which is the temporal contiguity principle. So, both spatial and temporal contiguity principle has been used here. You can see signaling by arrows and red fonts in this slide. Here again you can see the signaling along with the fading principle. You can see that the ring disappearing after I have finished talking about the content. This really reduces the extraneous load. I have used the temporal contiguity principle in this slide along with the signaling principle. Signaling by fading and flashing. You can see coherence and modality here. There is no extraneous materials included in this diagram other than the main content. And also modality, I'm explaining the picture only with narration. I've used split attention, both temporal and spatial, along with the signaling principle in this diagram. I've used the pre-training principle here. I'm giving the students a hint about an example that they have learned before. And also I have used coherence and fading principle. I have used focus self-explanation prompt here, but after suggestions from one of my user test, I also used menu-based self-explanation prompt. Here I am using feedback principle along with personalization principle because I'm asking the learners to go back to the video if they have trouble answering the questions. In this slide, I'm using a phase diagram because I wanted the learners to mentally animate a complex structure of DNA. Therefore, I'm using a metacognitive strategy. But you can see that I'm also using signaling principles along with spatial contiguity and temporal contiguity principles. Here you can see both forms of split attention modality, coherence, signaling, and redundancy principles. In this slide, I'm showing a simple coherent structure of DNA and RNA. Therefore, I'm using both modality and coherence principle. In this slide, you can see spatial, temporal, signaling, and coherence principles. I'm giving the students a self-reflective generative drawing activity, and therefore this is the drawing principle. This section has been included after suggestions that I've got from the user test. They wanted the slides to be summarized at the end. Here I am using the signaling principle by zooming and highlighting. This slide also was included as per suggestions from all three users. They wanted me to summarize the contents and also talk about the importance of the topic. I'm summarizing and also giving them a hint about what will be discussed in the next lesson. And concluding the lesson by giving them a team or a group task This is based on Focus Interactive's self-explanatory principle based on the ICAP hypothesis. So to conclude, I have tried to reduce extraneous processing in this instruction by using coherence, signaling principle, both spatial and temporal, redundancy principle, and feedback principle. I have tried to manage essential processing by using segmenting, pre-training, and modality principles. And I've also tried to foster generative processing by self-explanatory principles, giving the test after each sections, drawing principle, personalization principle, using a more conversational style of talking, and voice principle. I have used my voice instead of using any computer generated voice. This 3D animation was also added as per suggestions from one of the users. That's all about the multimedia principles that I've used for the instructions, and thank you very much for watching the video.